Hello, welcome once again to the Mind series. I'm Dr. Ryan Thompson. I'm the director of Mind Matters Clinic. And with me today is Linda Swedlin, my colleague. And together we'll be talking essentially the part 2 of executive function. A brief description of what executive function for those that missed the first episode. Executive function is higher level reasoning of the brain. So essentially you take all the thoughts, impulses, sensations of the brain, and then you try to organize and do something with them. Executive function basically includes things like reasoning and judgment, processing of information, and then doing something with it. So it's that ability to take all the information and do something. There are 7 different categories within executive function that we've chose to use, though different people may just define it differently. We've decided on just the 7 categories, and we'll be addressing each one of those things. The 7 categories we're talking about are planning, organization, time management, something called working memory, something else called response inhibition, or the ability to not react or respond to something, emotional regulation, and something called cognitive flexibility. The reason that these things are important to us at Mind Matters is a lot of people who have learning disabilities, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or autism spectrum disorders have struggles in these areas. So though this is not a defined diagnosis, executive function problems, it oftentimes describes pieces of the other people's difficulties that we see. So you may see an individual with learning disability or ADHD who has more or less of one of these difficulties, and it gives us a better way of describing what some of those difficulties are rather than just using the term learning disability or ADHD. So what we'd like to be focusing on tonight is what kind of treatment strategies do you have for individuals who have an executive function problem? Before I hand things over more to Linda, I'd like to mention that many of the things that you use to treat the underlying conditions, such as ADHD or the learning disabilities, can help with areas of executive function. That can include certain brain training processes and programs that we use, one being Fast Forward, another potential one's called CogMed, which is a computerized program, and also then the underlying things or anything that's going to improve brain function, which can include exercise, a proper diet, certain supplements and things like that. Anything, again, that may help with brain function, may help with executive function, since it's obviously part of the brain. So there's a lot of overlap that if you treat the underlying condition, you're going to improve the executive function. But more specifically, if you bring in a family or an individual and they have this area of struggle, what kind of specific tools might be able to do for that individual? And that's what I'd like to have Linda speak to this evening, is to talk about what would you do with an individual if they came in and they had one or more of these areas of executive function difficulties that we've identified through their assessment, and they say, okay, I have this trouble in this area, what would I do?
Okay, well let's talk generally before I get specific with the individual executive function skills. I think we can divide the interventions into 2 main categories. There's environmental interventions, and I think the 3 main ones there are you can change the physical or the social environment. Obvious ones would be, where the child sits in class. You could move them to a place that's not quite as distractable, where they're not as distracted. You can rearrange your own workspace if you find it's very cluttered or you're distracted by looking out in the yard. So that's changing the physical environment. You could also change the nature of the task. You could make it shorter. You could chunk it, make the steps very clear and short, attach timelines to them so you know how much time you should spend on each one. So that's changing the task. You can change the way the cues are provided or the direction. You could make it more visual. You could use checklists, schedules, rather than just lots of oral direction. So those are the environmental changes or strategies that we could use, and we'll talk specifically about those. There also are interventions at the level of the person, and I think the biggest one, the one that we want to address at Mind Matters, is teaching ways to develop an individual's executive skills. And that means through direct instruction, after we've identified what the weak areas are, is directly instructing. You define the problem, you set goals, you use your executive functions to achieve your goal, which is to hopefully improve the individual's executive functions.
Which oftentimes would include then, if you teach somebody how to do something and they do it in a repetitive way, then it becomes a habit or a very familiar way of doing something, which then means that the next time they set out to do it, that they're much more capable of doing it.
Absolutely. I'm going to mention that too. So I think we're going to directly instruct, but we also want to make sure that we're motivating the individual to use their executive function skills. And that might mean initially, especially for a child, that it's external motivation. There has to be some sort of payoff for doing this, especially if for a long time they haven't had to organize or plan because mom has been doing it for you this whole time. That's pretty easy. So we have to make sure that's reinforcing somehow. Okay, so that's kind of the general. Now let's take some of the executive functions and talk about some strategies. I want to start with working memory because I think it's just so critical, and it really drives a whole lot of the other executive functions. And
again, can you define working memory for those that didn't hear it last time?
Yes, I can. It's the ability to hold information in your mind while you're using that information to complete a task. And you made the analogy of juggling balls, trying to keep them all in the air and not dropping one. So you have this information, and you got to hold it, though, while you're doing something else. So, people that have problems with this, we see it a lot in schools, is multi-step directions given by the teacher, and child starts out and does this pretty good, but then even though they understand those directions, they kind of forget what they were halfway through.
Or drop pieces of information.
They drop pieces, and that means that they have a problem there with their working memory. As we mentioned earlier, the working memory abilities the skills are much better predictor of a child's academic performance than our IQ score. So it's really a critical area that we can work on. I think an important thing to note too is that it develops over time. An average 5-year-old can only hold 1 or 2 pieces in process of information. A 10-year-old, 3 to 4, and 14-year-old, many more than that. And as they should, because they're going to be moving between different teachers, and then adults too. Think of all the things you have to juggle in your life.
Which is then important also, if somebody has something like ADHD or learning problem, they might be able to do okay early on, but as other individuals increase their working memory ability and that individual doesn't, then over time they become more different than the average person.
Yeah, good point. And there are 2 types of working memory. There's auditory memory, and that's that where you're silent, repeat the phone number back when you're trying to dial. Mm-hmm. That's you using your auditory working memory. And anytime an individual is expected to follow a multi-step oral direction, they are using auditory working memory skills. And so a weakness there would be, again, losing track midway through and just not being able to complete that task. Visual spatial is the other type of working memory, and that's kind of like the brain's sketchbook. And what it is it allows you to picture something and keep it in your mind's eye while you're performing some task. We use that a lot when we do math, when we're trying to remember a pattern or a sequence or the location of something. We're using that visual spatial working memory. Okay, so that's kind of what it is. So there are a lot of great strategies out there, and we use them a lot without even thinking about them to support our working memory. If people have areas of weakness, if that's the area of weakness, we have to teach it. And I think one of my favorite ones, in fact, here's one that I made for myself. It's the old Post-it note. Think of the working memory as your brain's Post-it note. Call Gail. Okay? I don't need to store this forever, but I need to store it long enough so I can act on it and complete the task. Okay? I think checklists and to-do lists, again, that's a great way to support your working memory. I was just at Target the other day, and I bought these for $1 in the dollar bins, to-do lists, broken down by the day. I mean, this is great for the whole family to use. This one's things to do around the house. They had a whole series of
Don't
these.
give that to my wife, all right?
Okay.
All right.
These are great. This shows you that executive function is important in everyone's lives, and we can all use some things to support it. But you got to be taught how to use these things, okay? Just plain old to-do lists. I have a big copy of one. I use these with kids all the time. You know, this is, you can write on them, check it off when it's done. There's nothing better like checking that dumb thing off when it's finished, and then reward yourself a bit at the end. Can I do something fun when it's over? Okay, so using checklists is great. You can use pictures with littler kids. And then you had mentioned already too, but I think really helps with working memory is to create routines and rituals out of things. Do it the same way over and over and over again. For example, always put your cell phone in a certain place, and then you're going to know where it is if that becomes a ritual or a routine for you. Using electronic devices such as Palm Pilots, smartphones, etc., with all their tools now are really helpful. It's great. Let's take advantage of that electronic stuff. You can set watches and alarms. I use I'm going to do it right now, all the time. Don't forget to call Mom in 5 minutes. So I push the button and it'll ring, and then I hopefully will remember what it was I was supposed to do. We mentioned those sticky notes, write things down, break things into chunks so that it takes up a smaller slot in that working memory, so you don't have to remember quite so much. Just give 1 or 2 directions, not a huge list of directions, or write those directions down. I think of songs or rhymes or things to help you remember things. We were talking about mnemonic devices, how you learn the parts of the cortex by remembering this big string. Well, my favorite one that I shared was I had to remember the presidents in order when I was in junior high, and I still remember that acronym, at least the first part of it. And the presidents are Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe. And my acronym was, why are jerks mostly men? And I still remember that. So that kind of stuff can work for people, and it's fun. And it helps, it really does help your working memory, and it's just good to practice.
5 minutes?
1 minute, actually. Mindfulness training has been found to be helpful with adults to help them create a space in that working memory to allow them to focus on a single thought rather than being overwhelmed by all the garbage that's going on out there and going through their minds. So we can help our kids with that too, by just learning to reduce distractions and compartmentalize.
So when you're talking about mindfulness, basically it's, again, being able to focus, which means being able to narrow and decrease the number of balls you're trying to juggle in your working memory. If I can take some of the distraction and say, this is something I shouldn't be considering right now, and I toss it away, that leaves me with less things to consider.
And as we were saying earlier in the car, multitasking's overrated. It's not very effective. It's much better to focus your attention and do that one thing well. So.
And as we mentioned in the car, there was also the study that people who thought they were doing great with multitasking, when they've actually studied them and find out how productive and efficient they are, they do dismally. It's not a very good process. Okay. So people think they're doing better than they are.
It's a good point. I think, play games with yourself and with your kids, with yourself, for yourself, with your spouse. Grab a magazine and have a child in 30 seconds circle all the letter A's that they can find. This kind of quick visual scanning is linked to working memory. I just read that in a research study. You're on a road trip. Notice the first 5 cars that pass you and then say them backwards. Again, what research has found is that remembering something in a backwards sequence is a key feature of working memory. So play all those fun games. Do that concentration game. Helps with the visual spatial memory where you have to remember where the 2 birds were as you flip them over. Okay, there's lots of fun ways to work on your working memory. Okay, so let's move on to, we ready?
Let's move.
Okay, I'm going to clump planning, organization, and time management because they really are tied together. You need to do really all 3 to accomplish a goal. They are planning, which is the ability to create a roadmap to reach a goal. And I think our job is, for our kids and for ourselves, is to give yourself future glasses so you can see what it's going to look like when it's done. I think lots of times our plans fail because we really don't know exactly what it is we're trying to achieve. Okay, organization then is the ability to arrange things, events, things on paper into some sort of system so that you can use that as part of your plan. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then time management is the a capacity to estimate, complete tasks in a given amount of time. So they all really tie together if you really think about it. But let's take them one at a time and talk about planning. I think first of all, have a plan, have a schedule. Also at Target in the dollar bin, this.
You spent $5 already.
This is a calendar, places to write, and then there's all these other little to-dos for the month, notes, what's important. We all have this kind of stuff. The thing is, use it, make it fun, put it where your whole family can use it, put all sorts of things on it, make it really meaningful. So that you can look forward to things. Oh, we're going to go on that trip. We better plan for that. Has anyone called to make the reservation for the hotel? It just really is a good way to help with your planning.
And again, if you take something like that and you write it down on a list or a place like that, that's one less piece of clutter you have to have up in your head with all those balls that you're trying to juggle. You have one less thing then you can set aside. You say, okay, I can put it there because I can pick it up later.
Perfect.
So that's a way of doing that.
Use planners. A lot of people are using their phones or palms, adults. I still use the old-fashioned planner. A lot of schools require kids to use certain kinds of planners. They should really be using planners to track when assignments are due. There's lots of things, and it's really good. A lot of teachers require kids to do that. That's great, but a lot don't. So if they don't, help your child find a planner that works for them. They're very inexpensive. You can get them all over the place. TJ Maxx are just a couple of bucks, and help them learn how to use it. Make it fun, and model it yourself by using a planner yourself.
And again, that's one of those things that the challenge is obviously being able to do it over time. And so making sure that it continues to be something that the child or the individual has an incentive to continue to use, because that's where that habit or that process comes into play, that they use the planet for a week and they're done and it's not going to work out.
Absolutely. And so yes, it's something, and again, it's something that needs to be rewarded, so that it does continue to be motivating. And I think too, if people start using planners more effectively when they see the results, I'm getting that stuff done, I'm getting it turned in, I'm getting good feedback, that can be rewarding as well.
So a natural consequence that things go easier. Yes.
We talked about having a future glasses on so you can see what that goal is. I went to a training not long ago that I really liked the way she did plans, and I'm going to see if I can show this to you. The yellow section of a plan is the get ready. You have to have the stuff you need to complete your plan. What are the materials? All of that. Oh, wrong camera. Where am I?
That way.
Okay. The doing. What are the steps to complete it? And then what does it look like when it's done? That's the piece a lot of us don't have. Well, it'll be a 10-page paper. It'll be this completed project. So with younger kids, you can take pictures of all this stuff and put it in here so that they can see the progression of the plan. This one is attaching some time management to it by having this little clock face here. You can put when are you going to start, when are you going to end. Let's have a halfway checkpoint so we see if you're on track with what you're doing. It's visual. It helps people see that a plan really, is something that's kind of tangible. With, again, the end being, what is it going to look like when it's finished? Okay. And the things that go in here would be like, say, a recipe. Here's a recipe I used with some kids. Here's the step to get it done. Okay, but it doesn't have to be this fancy or elaborate. You could just have this as a template and just write these things down. And it's nice to even do this in your own head as an adult. Okay, what do I need? Okay, what are my steps going to be? Now, how will this be when it's finished? Okay.
So what is it I need? Have a picture down the road, and then the tools that I'm going to need and the process in between.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like it. It's nice, it's simple, it makes sense. Okay, organization, again, really tied to all this plan. You have to be organized. You have to have all your stuff in order to get started on it. So again, the ability to arrange things in a system. We talked about the backpack biopsy. That's a good test for determining whether, or look at somebody's work area in an office, a good test to see what their organization skills are like. Again, you want to teach them a system. Teach a system. Now, this same conference, I really like this. For example, those backpacks can be a big mess. So make it visual. And this should be, though I just pulled it off the computer, your kid's backpack, okay? And then what does it look like? Okay, help me. Oh.
That camera.
Okay. There's going to be books in it, my tracker, my notebook, you know what I didn't have in there is my planner, my lunch, my shoes for PE today, and it might be cold, so I need a sweatshirt. So you're going to take a picture of what's going to go in the pack, and maybe even show it packed. Checklists are great, you're going to include that too, but again, we're trying to create that mental image of what does finished look like. A packed pack, it's the done part of the plan. What does it look like? Okay, so again, I really like this idea. You can use this for a lot of different things. A lot of our kids and adults do have a really hard time organizing their stuff at school. Especially their notebooks. It's pretty individualized. Some systems work for some people and not for others. When I was just in a couple of high schools last week, I noticed most kids now are going back to a notebook, just like my school days, and with the little dividers and for each subject. Everybody wants to fit in, so maybe, but what I think the key is find a system that works for your kid, have them involved with you in figuring out what that is. There's a lot of great books out there for kids on how to organize. Strategies for Organization by Michelle Garcia Winner. This one's for teens, Where's My Stuff? The Organized Student. And what all these have in common is just lots of fun ways to organize yourself, and they're geared for students, and particularly kind of older elementary, middle school, high school kids.
Which brings up, obviously, that any strategy that you develop for an individual, it has to be age appropriate, and that then has to be modified as they get older. So what works in second grade is not going to work in fifth grade, and it's not going to work in high school. So it's a constant process of, it has to be an evolution. So it's not a single time or a single event. It's something that's modified over time.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I think the one thing that's key that all these books say is that the system does have to have some necessary components. A place for unfinished work, the work that you're still working on, your homework, for example, and place for the completed work. So many of our kids, they're working on their homework, they do it at home, mom saw it, but it never makes it to school somehow. It just disappears into the abyss of that backpack, maybe. So, a place for completed work and a place for handouts. And again, that's going to change with the different grades. For example, this is another system used by a lot of high school kids, a folder for each class. Inside, I just labeled this is, work to do, completed work, pretty simple. You could just slip handouts loose in there. Just so long as there's a system in place. That's the key.
It has to be easy.
Yeah, this
has
is
to be
easy.
reliable.
Yeah,
That's right.
I also saw some kids in one of the books recommend an accordion file with little pockets for each class. Those are okay too. It does, easy, something simple, something the kid's going to use, and that they have some buy-in to want to use. I think we talked about this, or I did in another session we did. Help the kids organize. They can do their own labels. I actually do this in my office. Put labels on things. For a younger kid, label where things are to go. This is the underwear drawer and socks, shirts, pants. You could also label things that the cupboards are not supposed to get into, but help them be organized by labeling where things go. Again, some of these things are pretty easy to do, and they can really make a difference. Organize your own workstation at home. Go take a look at it. Do you have what you need? Are you always digging around trying to find a pencil or whatever? Is it just a big mess? Are you distracted by what's out the window? You can use these same things on yourself by taking a look at it, and it might affect your productivity level if you kind of clean up your act a little bit there.
And sometimes adults also find just getting help from somebody who is pretty organized, they can sometimes help them declutter their environment or their desk or something like that, and then try to develop tools, because most of the time, especially in adults, you'll find that they'll start doing something and it works pretty well, but then it starts to deteriorate, and then sometimes they have to kind of reinstitute it, and sometimes get help from somebody who has a better idea of how to organize.
You're right, and also adults too need to be rewarded for this. So that's something important to keep in mind too. I already shared with you some of my books. I think another critical thing here, and you already had mentioned it, is you need to schedule weekly times to clean and organize your pack. You just don't do it once and it's going to stay that way. Or to go through your notebook, or to clean off your work area. Put those on your calendar. Everybody's going to, organize their work area, their homework station, etc. Make that part of your routine so that it just becomes something you do.
And again, if you're doing that as a parent, then trying not to make it a time to catch the child not doing it, but being able to assist them and making sure their system's working for them.
You're so good.
So it's all the attitude. All
It is,
attitude, yes.
Yeah, we want this to be fun and to be reinforcing too. So it needs to be positive. Time management, of course, is tied into all of this. It's the yikes, the capacity to estimate, allocate time, which I'm not doing very well here, to complete a task within time constraints. Again, use schedules, impose limits, and provide reminders. Oh, you've only got this much time left. Use timers. This is a visual timer, if I can get it to work here, that shows how much time is left. Okay, we have 10 minutes to complete this task. And you can see it, and then it'll ding as well. Regular timers work fine, things like my watch. I think using an analog clock is really good. That's this kind of clock rather than digital, because it does show the passage of time. You can mark it, as I did here. Okay, here's when you're going to start your homework. I want you to do a check-in halfway through to see how you're doing, and this is when you should be done. Practice estimating the passage of time with kids, doing fun things. Okay, how long does it take you to get dressed in the morning? Let's time. What do you guess? Well, let's time it. How long does it take you to eat your breakfast? What do you guess? Let's time it. Make it fun. Again, practicing all this stuff is going to ingrain it in your kids and in you, too. I think a lot of us underestimate how much time we're going to need to complete tasks. So it's a nice thing just to do yourself from time to time. As usual, I'm running out of time. My last area, though, is emotional regulation. And that is the ability to modulate your responses by bringing rational thought to bear on your feelings so you can control those impulses. And, kids who blow up are frustrated easily, adults, too, who have anger management issues. This means they're having difficulty with that emotional regulation. I think the big thing here for adults and kids is you got to learn the signs of stress and your personal triggers, okay? You got to learn what sets you off. And then you need to learn some coping strategies such as relaxation techniques, ways to take a break so you can regroup, and teach those to your kids too. There's, again, some great books out there. The Relaxation and Stress Reduction book for kids. Contact us at Mind Matters. We have lots of materials. We'd be glad to talk to you about this stuff. And there's lots of good stuff out for adults as well. Again, you need to recognize what it looks like when you're starting to escalate or get stressed, and what are those strategies you can use to get back on track again. I think we're running out of time. Do you have some things you want to say here?
No, I just say that when you talk about emotional regulation, it is that ability to anticipate things sometimes, so that if you frequently have a problem when you enter into a certain situation, you're able to anticipate it and then try to predict it, then try to think ahead to how I might respond differently next time. So trying to coach kids and adults that way, that helps.
That's a great idea. I think we're about done here. Anything else we want to say about this?
You zipped through that fast.
I did, because I thought I was running out of time. Yikes.
Okay.
We were afraid we were going to do this.
Now you don't have enough time. Okay.
Okay.
What I would say is that when you look at all of these things, and you did go through some of these kind of fast, it's being able to try to pick one or two of these things and not try to overload the system.
Absolutely.
So if you are an adult and you're working with a child or you're working with another adult, don't try to address all of the executive functions at the same time. Otherwise, you will overwhelm yourself and everybody around you.
And your child.
And you will fail. And then you will give up the whole project and say, I'm never doing that again because it's a waste of time. So pick one thing, maybe pick two things, and once that's been instituted and working, then you go ahead to the next thing. So you add things sequentially, one thing at a time until you see improvement over time. And so that, again, will maintain that encouragement to continue to do it. If a child or an adult sees that, then again, that's an incentive all by itself to saying, okay, I like this process, I'm seeing the benefit, therefore I want to continue on in a sequential way to do it. So that's part of the motivation all by itself. So that will conclude our discussions on executive function. There's obviously a lot of resources available, so come to us and we can give you some more information. Thanks a lot.